Thanks for your patience. I realize it's the end of the day, so I hope to try and make it as concrete as possible, also in consideration of the upcoming presentation. I've been introduced. My name is Yolande. I work at Casco, Office for Art, Design and Theory, and I'm part of a larger team. There's a handful of us, about give or take 10, including interns. I suppose it's always also good to introduce my role at Casco, because I come at the projects in a very particular manner. I am concerned with publications. My formal title is Publication and Education Coordinator. So that means that I manage a lot of the publications that go through Casco, and I manage or I liaison with like our graphic designer, for instance, and deal with PR work in the widest sense. So I talk a lot from this perspective. Here I'm introducing Casco in a kind of celebratory moment. This is last year when we moved to our new building in the city center. And we're based in Utrecht. That's like 30 minutes away from Amsterdam by train. And we moved to the so-called museum quarter. So here you see a kind of the inauguration of the space, and we moved to the new space and opened a new project called New Habits. So Casco itself is an open and public space for artistic research and experiments, and we consider artistic practice as a way of engaging with the world that we live in a kind of investigative, imaginative, and inventive practice. Simply put, I suppose the aim of our work is to contribute to forming non-capitalist cultures and ways of working, and position is that art can have an essential role in contributing towards that. So we've been around for 25 years. Actually, this year is our 25th anniversary. And I mention this also because it's the close of a three-year-long kind of line of investigation or thematic called Composing the Commons, where for the last 3 years we've been concerned with artworks and practices that wrestle with this notion, as we were also coming to terms with it. So this image is coming from the current exhibition. We are the Time Machines, Time and Tools for Commoning, which is in a sense a kind of almost an archival show in that it reflects back on the last 3 years, and is looking to the artworks that were developed and presented within the context of the Commons, and kind of looking back at them to seeing how exactly that worked, and if not, what we can do to address that. So what it is actually is several of our projects, as well as ways of working, represented in a big diagram form. So we are the Time Machines. Sets out to address this notion and reflect back. And in this context of the exhibition, we're also attempting to rethink how art relates to viewers and how art organizations operate. So thinking about the structure of the art organization as well. And maybe at the center of all of this, we're thinking about the usefulness of art. So this idea of tooling comes in, and in order for that to be effective, I suppose, time is essential. And we think about this in relation to conversation, with the idea that conversation enlivens a piece of art. And maybe at the center of that is this notion of study that we've been looking at in the context specifically that Stefano Harney and Fred Moten speak about. And herein we suggest that study is a mode of attending to sociability, and we do this more specifically through what we call the conversation card that facilitates each artwork, or each tool rather. So it's not artworks per se that are shown in the current exhibition, but maybe facets of artworks, along with a conversation card. And the conversation card is kind of maybe the instigator for further conversation to be taken up. So it requires that one or group of people, I mean, there's study groups that are also, that there is a study group rather that formed to think about this idea of tooling, that you struggle together and study together, and ultimately, I guess, to resist capitalist mantras and kind of managerial and oppressive systems, and instead you try and think of alternatives by thinking through the artwork. But before I maybe go in further detail about the We Are the Time Machines exhibition that's currently at Casco, I thought for this small presentation, I'd try and think back about how we came to tooling, especially since I understand the Media Lab team was, or at least the premise of the invitation was the project, The Grand Domestic Revolution. And therein, and in many ways, this project is kind of the groundwork for our investigation or work into the commons. So what it was is a living research project that started in late 2009 and 2010. And in a way, it kind of makes sense to look back to this project, since this time machine is a kind of archival project. But mainly, I mean, the project and the publication on the chair, thank you. I always struggle to talk about this one because it's such a mammoth of a project. It started in 2010 and it's still in some senses continuing. But one way that I found to do it is to zoom into particular things or particular chapters. So I want to talk about a little bit about apparatus and inhabitation, which is the first and the second chapter, roughly, in the book, just highlighting a few things. But maybe it makes sense first to give a bit of background. So I said that the project is living research by Casco that landed up being influential to our program. And what it does, it calls for kind of collective intervention into the home, which is understood as a privatized or individual space. And it works on urgent issues such as working at home, housing conditions from the perspective of social injustice. And it does so and did so together with artists, designers, workers, organizers, and so on. So practically what it was a residency that was set up kind of up the road from where we were at the time before we moved into the festive image that I showed you at the beginning. And the residency was a response to an invitation from the Social Design Biennale at the time. And what our response was to set up a residency that would look into a kind of binary between public and private space. And eventually the project understood the space in between public and private as a potential site for the commons. So as a reference, the project looks to architectural urban historian Dolores Hayden, where she publishes in 81 a book called The Grand Domestic Revolution. So our book nicks her title, in a sense, or appropriates it. And there she's looking at 19th century material feminist movement, particularly in the US, and she kind of reveals the innovative plans and kind of visionary strategies of these women who developed kind of theory and practice of what she calls material feminism. So this is Dolores Hayden along with other people. And they did so in pursuit of economic independence and social equality. So they had ambitious goals, for instance, of socialized housework and childcare, and in many ways kind of revolutionizing the American home and creating community services. So we were influenced very much by this book, as well as maybe the 1970s mantra, the personal is political, as well as the idea of challenging kind of challenging nuclear family structures and values. So it began, like I said, in by the end of 2009 and 10, and it developed at Casco over the course of, in Utrecht over the course of 3 odd years, where the apartment served as a kind of headquarters for our grand domestic revolution. And it continues in a sense. Most recently, the GDR, which is short for Grand Domestic Revolution, library has been the one that's been touring. So what landed up happening is that the projects culminated to an now I lost my train of thought. The projects culminated to an exhibition, and the exhibition landed up touring. So different institutions, like different art organizations, like Showroom, for instance, in London, or Tensta Konsthal in Stockholm, would take up parts of the project and make them site-specific, dealing with themes. So, for instance, in one space, the question of housing may be the theme that was taken up, and others left behind. So that's to say that the project wasn't a traveling exhibition that was set, but was adopted each time in each location. So what we have here is, I don't know if you see it, but towards the end of the residency, we were figuring out how we were already starting to think about the publication together with the designer. The book is designed by design collective Obakia, based in London. We were thinking about how to capture all of the different kind of activities that happened in the apartment space over time. So what you see here is a kind of enactment of different ones, of the different activities that happened, as well as different researches. So here, for instance, it's not very clear, but you see a loom. There was an artist by the name of Travis Meinhof, who's a self-proclaimed action weaver, and he set up a kind of weaving workshops where he built a big loom the first time he came, and then he came several more times where he would make make weaving workshops together. He would make weaving workshops for a public and kind of exchange things with our immediate neighbors. So, for instance, we landed up making labels from neighbors that lived below the apartment at the time that were printing T-shirts. This is the apartment from the outside, so we were at the top there. So back to this idea of apparatus. So when we first inhabited the space, we reached out to architect Jessica Fazer and IFAO, both based. IFAO is a architecture collective, and they're both based in Berlin, and we had worked with them for some time to kind of provide us a set of tools for the project. And what they did is create a kind of a system called Many Furniture, and what it is essentially is IKEA furniture in kind of obscene abundance that was color-coded. In kind of color-coded to facilitate different kinds of meetings or organizations that would happen in the apartment. So, for instance, light blue was designated for public moments. Red was designated for the individual artists. And it wasn't so much that they wanted to prescribe this way of inhabiting a space, but maybe to instigate something. So here you see how it was adapted over time. Maybe another concrete one is two-part door. This was made by artist Miriam Toman in response to kind of critique of the apartment, was that when two people resided the space that didn't know each other, there wasn't room for private space. So this kind of two-part door could be opened and closed accordingly, and it went in here, kind of separating the kitchen area from the rest of the apartment area. And then, of course, we had a library, which I mentioned briefly, that continues to grow. It's, over 250 titles that kind of serve the project and act as a reference for us. And the library is in the Casco office at the moment. So quickly to this idea of inhabitation. So after such tools maybe are made, one has to live with them somehow. And I think this living with the tools brought up this issue of maintenance, which I think is maybe, at least for me, one of the greatest lessons from the GDR project. So with inhabitation, so I mentioned the library. There you see this notorious image of me eating an apple, but it's the only image of the library. So this idea of living with the tools, what happened in the second year of the project, I think, which was maybe a shift, was that we recognized that a lot of the issues that we were concerned with didn't necessarily resonate with our immediate neighbors. And maybe a concrete way of saying this is a lot of the response from the attempt of making a private space public. So another project, for instance, sought to publicize the balcony area by making a public garden out of it. And that public garden, in effect, would link with other balcony systems that kind of shared the area through a hanging structure of plants. And through the course of trying to realize this project, our immediate neighbors, and you have to understand that we were in the center of the city, right? So quite a wealthy area in Utrecht, and our immediate neighbors kind of responded to us by saying that we want to keep our private space private. And I recognize this moment in the project as a kind of shift where we realized that the projects that we were somehow, or the issues rather, that we were somehow concerned with didn't necessarily resonate with our immediate neighbors, but there were different communities that were busy with the same issue, for instance. And that came to light when we started meeting in town meetings. So, for instance, our relationship with domestic workers, particularly undocumented domestic workers, came through the realization that there are other people that aren't our immediate neighbors that are concerned with this work. So when I'm thinking about inhabitation, I'm thinking about, like, for instance, the town meetings that would come into effect in the second year of the project, where all of the research that the residents of the apartment were undertaking would be presented in a town meeting, which was the public moment for that. And then public moment for presenting their research with invited stakeholders, for instance. We came to know of the undocumented domestic worker campaign through a town meeting, for instance. And a lot of the kind of communities that we work with at the moment at Casco, I think, solidified around that moment. For example, the Indonesian Migrant Workers Union is holding a screening at Casco in the context of the We Are the Time Machines project. And our relation with them has gone up and down over the years. It's not that we have been solidly aware of each other throughout the 4 odd years. But our meeting and our relations with them, at least the ones that founded IMVU, the Indonesian Migrants Workers Union, reside in the context of the GDR project. So this is an example of a town meeting, for instance. Okay. And I actually wanted to mention Read-In as well as another example of inhabitation. Read-In is a project by artist Annette Kraus, and what it basically is how Read-In started off was with also in the same vein of antagonizing this binary between public and private space. It was a reading group without a home, and what they would do is knock on the doors of neighbors and ask them to host their reading session. And they made use of the GDR library, for instance, at the beginning of the project. So returning to We Are the Time Machines and this notion of conversation card. I'm thinking about this in relation to tooling, which has been mentioned several times today, because I think maybe apparatus and inhabitation kind of merge together to make tooling, or tooling is somehow a third step from the two. So this is an example of a conversation card, this is our designer's example of how it would be used. This is a conversation card that would facilitate an artwork in the We Are the Time Machines exhibition. So here, tooling is based on the idea that tools for commoning don't pre-exist. They're made through collective situations and effort, instead of maybe having an objectively written descriptive text that often accompanies an artwork. So the conversation card should spur experimental stories and conversation that are kind of generated either personally or collectively. And this is an illustration of how it would be used. So this would be the card, the initial text that one would write in collaboration rather with someone else, and then stickers can be used as annotation by the next person or the visitor. So the exhibition itself, We Are the Time Machines, is split into four rooms. And the project itself, we returned back to Jesco Fazer and working again with Andreas Miller, who also designed, co-designed the interior architecture for the Grand Domestic Revolution. And we worked on an adopted symbol. The graphics are by David Benowith. And I mentioned them because I guess this exhibition is also the most design architectural one that we've had in a while that I can remember, where architecture at least is so much at the center. So the exhibition is not only for looking or viewing, but also for acting and doing and gathering together. In fact, I think the testament of the exhibition will lie with how much it's used. And like I said, it's composed of a 4-room structure, which is also the exhibition structure upstairs in the building. The first one is called a Room for Collective Imaginary, or Radical Imagination. This is this room over here. So it's imagination that has to do with maybe your hands and your body, and a kind of physical imagination. And here drawing is at the center. And it's very much influenced by Mexican collective Cráter Invertido, whom we've come to know via another project called Arts Collaboratory. And in a sense, the project also, or We Are the Time Machines, was a mirroring of their collective, which is not to try and equate Casco to Creación Vertido. Of course, they are based in Mexico, and we in Utrecht. Socio-political contexts are very different, but nevertheless, there are affinities there. So we drew inspiration from what happens when you mirror the two institutions, especially in the context or in the guise of the commons. So anyway, they have this for radical imagination as a tool. They collectively draw together in so-called Zungale drawings, and you see examples of them on the walls here. So this is, in a way, what's mimicked on the table. And then the second space is called Office for Unlearning Art Organization, or Site for Unlearning Art Organization. What's happened is that the office, which is downstairs, is split into upstairs and downstairs. And the idea is that as we're working through these notions that maybe are in the public front, we're also trying to rethink structurally of the team. So the back side of the institution, through the notion of unlearning, which we've returned to working with artist Annette Kraus. And this is part of a larger body of research for her. And the iteration that she's doing with us concerns unlearning the art organization. I'll return to this later if there's a bit of time. The third room is called Common Study Library, which is maybe designed for kind of militant study or concentrated study. So the printed matter, the publication matter, for instance, can be viewed in the space. There's also films. You see monitors with video works and kind of a video work that introduces the commons. And this project, for instance, is a residue or part of a larger installation by artist Adelita Husni Bey, and she was looking into, basically she's addressing squatting since the ban came into effect in Europe, but she, in particular, we worked with her in Utrecht to address it locally through a series of draft meetings. So she is concerned with making a convention that somehow addresses the squatting ban, and she facilitates or instigates drafting this convention collectively with different groups and stakeholders. So we hosted so-called draft meetings in different cities in the Netherlands, and the convention is online if you're interested. And then the last room is the so-called dark room, or Plane for UIQ, and it's by artists Graham Thompson and Sylvia Maglioni. And basically it's a kind of sonic space or specialized electroacoustic sound work that they created around Guattari's unmade science fiction screenplay, which is called A Love of UIQ. So it's a space for imagining things that haven't happened yet. So actually, maybe I'm in record time, which is good. Returning to Site for Unlearning. So this is the second room. So unlearning, actually, we've been working on it as a team for a while, and since maybe since last year, and we presented it in exhibition form altogether during New Habits, which was the exhibition that we held in 2014. We moved to the space that opened last May Day, or May Day of 2014. So the idea behind it is that production and management tend to make up the brunt of everyone's office activity, and including Casco, so including our own. And this activity, or what we've come to understand as this notion of feeling busy all the time, is very much something that we pinpointed as when Aneta, for instance, proposed what is it that an art institution or you as an art organization would want to learn. Through talking it through, we came down to this notion of busyness, and we connected it very quickly to this this realization that we were undermining reproductive labor, which is maybe surprising. Seeing that, for instance, reproductive labor or recognizing reproductive labor was very much at the heart of what we do. So when it comes to like recognizing domestic work as real work, for instance, the same way that we were joining the campaign or working together with domestic workers, but in our own work somehow that became sidelined. So unlearning, we've narrowed it down to deal with this notion of busyness in the widest sense. And we've made it concrete, one concrete thing that's maybe come out of these meetings. We meet every Monday morning after our staff meeting, is that we now, for instance, clean collectively the physical space. The idea being that you make time to clean collectively, to recognize it as real work. The same way that you need, for instance, time to in order to tool an artwork, right? Time is at the center of it as well. And what you see here is it's actually a GIF, but that didn't work out. It's a it's a reenactment of Muriel Laderman-Ukeli's maintenance work. She's cleaning the stair or the stoops of an art space. So meeting weekly on a Monday and cleaning physically together is one like solid exercise that's come out of it. We're addressing this notion of digital cleaning, right? Because sidelining reproductive work in the physical space is not the only thing that happens. Of course, reproductive work happens behind glowing computer screens as well. We're constantly emailing, but not honoring, if we can say it like this, that work as real work. So we're kind of workshopping the idea still. Like we were speaking to our designer about his archival method, trying to learn from him and how he organizes his work. And the idea is hopefully that we eventually get to tool this. Another one, which is maybe the final thing that I will mention, is we also try to hack, and I use this word very loosely, particularly in this audience, the manifesto of Muriel Laderman-Ukeli that deals with maintenance, and it's written in the 70s. And we try to update it to address contemporary situations. So, for instance, how